hello everybody. My name is Craig Dearden Phillips. I'm the convener of Social Club, which for those that don't know it is it's a club for social leaders. We define social leaders quite broadly. It's chief execs, it's people who lead teams and organisations that exist for social purpose. Throughout the crisis, we've been running a series of webinars where we brought in really interesting people to talk about how they're responding to the crisis, and we've tried to bring together all sorts of material and ideas to help you get through the crisis and also look above the parapet to what comes after. So we've had a lot of interesting people, as I say. We've had people from the forces, we've had people from Gold Command, we've had philosophers, we've had economists, and today we've got a chief exec with us called Simon Blake. Now, many of you will know Simon from Twitter. He's a very, very well-known, regarded figure in the third sector, and not just for his work with Mental Health First England, he's also deputy chair of Stonewall as well, which is obviously a very, very high-profile and highly regarded organisation. Simon's here today in his capacity as Chief Executive of Mental Health First Aid England. And the reason I asked Simon to come was twofold. One, I got to know his organisation quite well last year when we did a little bit of work with Mental Health First Aid England. It's a very unique and very exciting organisation that's growing really quickly, and I think deals not only with its work but also its workforce with in a really interesting and distinctive way. So it was because of that, really, that experience. I got to know Simon really well in that time that I asked him to come on today, really to talk about probably three things. One is what mental health first aid is all about. Two, why it matters at this time for organisations, and perhaps thirdly as well, a bit about his organisation and about its response, and then how he's dealing with what is for all of us an uncertain picture going into the future. So Simon, that's probably enough of a drum roll. I think we've got everybody on we're going to get on for today, and so I'm going to hand over to you and for the next 15 minutes. Now, in terms of questions, if people do them on chat, I'll then know you're there, and I can bring things to you. We'll let Simon talk for 15 minutes, and then we open it up from there. That's our protocol. So I look forward to those. Do just put them on chat. It's really easy to choose the buttons. Simon, thank you, and thanks for joining us from your location today. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks very much for having me, Craig. And yeah, I guess I will do sort of an intro, and then the questions that you have are probably the most important piece of this. I guess the first thing that I just wanted to remind ourselves is it may feel like a lifetime, but it is actually only 4 weeks that we are really going to. I was on holiday in America 4 weeks ago, and saw Trump dealing with it really badly from Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday, was due to come home on the Sunday, decided to get on a flight on Friday. The following Monday we went into lockdown. So and the reason that I start by saying that is just a reminder that already it feels like a very long time, and it's been a short time, and as leaders we have no idea how long this is going to go on for. So it's really critical that we just remind ourselves that we can't, none of us can do a marathon forever. So in terms of our mental health and well-being, paying close attention to it as leaders is really critical for staff. So Mental Health First Aid England is a social enterprise. Our mission is to improve the mental health of the nation. Mental Health First Aid is a very particular type of mental health support, which is, as it says on the tin, it's a first aid, it's a first response, and came over from Australia 20 odd years ago. Our focus now is around workplaces, and I can send some further information out to you afterwards. But we have three main things which we do. One is to try and help workplaces to transform, to be mentally healthy. The second was to support people in community settings who work with young people through our reinvestment programme. And then the third is to try and be an exemplar employer. And I'll just talk to you a bit about what we've done since the lock-in, since COVID-19 in a moment. But the theme of what I'm going to try and do is just to take what I've gleaned from doing a number of these webinars with people and got their advice, what we've done ourselves, and just sort of offer that to you, for you in your, what I'm sure is a continuing repertoire of thinking and understanding about how you hold your organisations through this from a well-being perspective. Yeah, I guess the first and most important thing for us to acknowledge is that most people are not used to operating at this pace of change. That if we're lucky, we will be working from home in safe places with enough space to work, and that lots of people are not in safe places, and a lot of people don't have good spaces within which to work. So your employees, our starting assumption should not be everything is good for people, but actually my first responsibility, our organisation's first responsibility, is to try to understand whether it is good enough, and if it isn't okay, whether there's anything that the organisation can do to help people in that environment. At the outset of this, there's a lot of focus on core principles in relation to best practice and in promoting well-being for people working from home. And I think the most important thing for us to also remember, of course, is that some of you will have people who are also still going to work and are not just remote working. The narrative is often everyone's working from home, let's make the most of it. But actually, of course, some of you, and I know some of you will also have staff, some of whom are working from home, some of whom are going in every day. And we need to just try and make sure we're not tone deaf to the fact that there are people who have different fears and different expectations in different places. But for those people who are working from home, the first and most important is that we need to create routines. Our brain needs looking after in order that our brain can look after us. And one of the ways that we best look after our brain is by creating routines, whether that's the alarm going off, whether that's clearing the kitchen table at the end of the day and then setting it back up again the next day, whether it's walking from the lounge into the kitchen and doing that 4 times, or doing your one exercise before work, whatever it is, that actually our brain thrives on some form of routine. And that when we are in this sort of endless days, and most of us only know it's Tuesday because we might have had a long weekend, a lot of the time the days are molding into one. So how do you help your brain look after you? By creating some of the routines. Clearly then keeping active, that physical and mental health are not separated. Ruby Wax describes our body as a onesie, and that with the relationship between our body and our mind is really critical. And without being preachy, one of the things that it is worth reminding ourselves and reminding other people is that our body and our brains work best based on when we eat well, when we don't drink too much alcohol, when we get enough exercise, and when we manage to sleep well. And that those are basics which are important for everyone, however well, whether they have mental illness, whatever's happening, that those basics are important all of the time. That keeping connected was one of the main things which people gave advice about in individual conversations, in teams, on Zoom calls, on social channels. I think I would just say now, one of the things we might need to be talking to our staff about is how do you disconnect the number of texts, the number of WhatsApps, the number of Teams channels, the number of Zoom calls. Then people want to have Zoom drinks, and then you've got to check in on parents or relatives. That actually, I think we may, digital transformation, that's taken many organisations 10 years, transformed in 3 weeks, and suddenly there's a question which is as much about how do you disconnect and encourage people to disconnect as it is to connect. And then, of course, that one of the main things around emotional well-being is that you observe differences in people, whether that's differences in appearance, whether that's differences in the way that they look, or the way they respond, or the way they engage in meetings. And those things are not as immediately obvious where you're not seeing stuff. So how do you create those opportunities to understand where and when people are feeling well and when they're not? And I think the starting point should be that we'll all have good days and bad days. There aren't any of us that are going to just be floating on air all of the time at the moment. And so that the conversation which we're having is very much about how are things today, how are things right now as part of the everyday conversations, and trying as a leader and as senior leaders to be modeling with people and saying, often it's we will lead with our enthusiasm and our exuberance, and there is also a part of it now which is leading and recognizing that there are inevitably going to be difficult days for people. I'm always really grumpy on a Monday because my weekends used to be with dogs and horses, and my dog's with my parents. My horse I'm not allowed to go and see, and so I'm indoors all weekend, and being Cornish country boy, that just makes me grumpy when it comes to Mondays. And actually acknowledging that has enabled some really interesting conversations with people. I guess as we move through into this next sort of period, the things which I think are really, really important, if you haven't already put your existing business plan on pause and worked out what the slimmed down objectives are and found a way to communicate that, please do. It's one of the, we're now on the third week of communicating on a paused business plan, slimmed down objectives. And some people are still, including myself sometimes, finding themselves going back to the business as usual plan. And actually, that feels overwhelming for people. It feels difficult. So how do you make sure you're really communicating the here and now? What are the most important things? So we have said, number one objective, to stay in business and to remain solvent. And so when we furloughed staff, one of the things which you're saying to furloughed staff is you're helping us with that objective. Everyone has a role to play. Second is ensuring that there's the brand awareness and that we're communicating clients. Third, that we digitize and virtualize everything. Fourth, a new product which we were taking to market. Fifth one, around connecting and engaging and supporting the well-being of staff, clients and staff. And then the sixth, we are doing some work around, we've ripped up the bit which is around community reinvestment with working with young people and reconnecting that into supporting NHS and frontline staff. So everybody who is furloughed is working towards objective one, supporting with financial objectives. Everyone else is now reshaped and reworking around the other five. And it just means that you disrupt the normal. And I would just encourage you to think about that. We've also described what we're doing as working in 4 stages. So we talked about responding to the immediate crisis, which we have done. We've done that with the 6 objectives, with the furloughing of some of our staff. Now we're in a normalised crisis, which is just working and doing the best we can with what we know in this phase of something that's become normal. That over the next few weeks, we'll start seeing a road to recovery, whatever that is, whether it's, we know that we're in lock-in for 6 months or they're going to dial up and dial down, that there will be a moment that we'll start seeing that, and that we should always be planning for that. And then there will be a new normal, because we're never going back to normal as normal was. And so each time we're communicating, we've got that frame of that 4 phases and the 6 objectives. And it's just helping us, I think, to create more and more clarity for people in a time when there's a lot of uncertainty. And that feels as though it's helping us and getting some cut through. I think you will know this already, but part of well-being is, of course, being honest with staff. We're getting lots and lots of questions which we don't know the answers to, and that, as what can sometimes feel like brutal honesty, is a really, really important part of people's well-being and enabling people to understand the knowns and the unknown. So again, your leadership is based, of course, on honesty, but being really explicit about why particular decisions were made, being really explicit when we're dealing with the immediate, when we're imagining the future, being really explicit where the crunch points will be, and where there will be pinch points, and where you'll need people to go over and above, and where it's possible for people to actually just take the foot off the accelerator for a moment if that's there, and communicating and over communicating that honesty. All of that is really, really critical. So then, just in the last couple of minutes, some of the things which I've really picked up from some of the other people that have been talking about is that it can be easy, if you're talking about communicating about working from home, for people to think that all they're doing is working from home and that it's business as usual. And I think it just making sure you communicate over and over again. The world is increasingly anxious. Many of you might well be trustees of other organisations, have partners who have got organisations as well as your organisations, or working on the front line and dealing with that, or have ill parents, or trying to work out how to homeschool, whatever it is. That just reminding people that that is the context we're operating in, that you understand that, and that the way we work, the way we deliver, the way we achieve is understood within that context. It isn't understood in the context of we just picked up our computer bag and went and sat on a nice desk. And the more times I think you can remind people of that, the better. Talk to you about looking after your brain so it can look after you. And I just think, again, lots of us don't understand some of the basics around how our brain works, and I don't mean that we have to understand neuropsychology, but just recognizing that link between routine, eat, sleep, alcohol, what we eat and our exercise, etc., is really important, and just re-emphasizing that. However, the flip side of that, of course, is that can become another thing to beat yourself up about if you don't get it right. We also have to recognize that we can't beat ourselves up for not being able to do the self-care, the routines, the food. Sometimes just putting one foot in front of the other is success. So let's celebrate that. Of course, I'm sure all of you are much quicker at picking up risk in this current scenario than success, but making sure that you've got everybody focusing on success and celebrating them super hard, whether you've got a Teams channel which is nice feedback, or whether you've got 10 minutes at the beginning of every meeting which enables that to happen. Now more than ever, just that encouragement and the reminder and the personal thank yous into people is ever more critical. One of our colleagues who's a social club or support club member asked all of their colleagues what would help them to work from home, and then sent each of the members of staff that, whether it was a candle, a plant, bottle of wine, whatever it was, just whatever it is that we can do to express that gratitude, is really, really important. It doesn't have to be big, but does have to feel as though it's authentic. Talk to you about disconnecting as important as connecting. I think our main issue will be helping people to disconnect in the coming weeks and months, because all weekend, I don't know if any of you have been on that wretched house party app, but if you have, I just recommend deleting it from your phone immediately, because it shows everybody going in and wanting to talk to you at any time. Part of that, counsellors have always worked on the basis of a 50-minute hour rather than an hour, in order to make sure there are gaps. And I'm sure if you're like me, that you can sometimes go down, get your cup of coffee, and suddenly find it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you've been on hour after hour of Teams call. So reducing everything to 45 minutes or 50 minutes or 20 or 25 minutes to make sure that there is always that gap in between. And also making sure that there's that you are factoring in time to check in with people at the beginning of the meetings. I'm sure you're already experiencing it, but an hour's meeting or 50 minutes meeting 15 minutes of it now is often checking in, asking people how they are, and then you still seem to manage to get the same business done because people are much briefer. So physically putting on the agenda, checking in, encouraging your line managers and staff to do the same with their teams, really important. And then just finally, when you are moving between meetings, when you're going into work and going back, that's when we process things, that's when we think, that's when the dots join up. And somehow we've got to encourage staff to find ways to think as well as to do. And some of that natural thinking time would have been when you were unrestricted, when you were moving around. And the danger, if we don't encourage people to build in time to think, is that all of that thinking will start happening in their spare time or when they're trying to sleep. So building that cultural expectation that it's okay to build in an hour, 2 hours, however long you think it is in relation to different bits, for people to just think, to process what's happening, and to encourage them to do so. So those, I think, are the main things. We have got a number of courses, like everybody else. We've moved stuff on to online. I can send you some information if you would like. We are fast tracking a module for line managers about supporting staff to work from home. For those of you who are working from home, who have got people working from home, in order to try and support that, we'll be ready fairly shortly. Yeah, I mean, I guess just to end, none of this is rocket science. It's just slowing down enough to remember we're human, and to connect in that human way. When we're here to slow down, and there's a time when we need to speed up in order to respond. That's perhaps our biggest challenge. But enabling and encouraging your senior teams, your line managers, and talking them through some of those principles of slowing down, encouraging people to think, I think is that really important thing to do. And then finally, social channels. I don't know what your internal systems are, but we have somebody who does a radio on Fridays through Teams, which just takes people into the weekend. We've got people who put up, so today is fitness day, so we've had our circuit training, which you can do without having any space or any circuits, designed from our fitness people. And each day people do something. So just trying to create that social channel, which is perhaps separate from the work channel, but encouraging people to really use that. And if you have furloughed staff, encouraging them to use those channels, but keeping a very clear boundary between the work and the social ones, seems to be working. Gone over 15 minutes, so over to you.
Hey, thank you, Simon. Thanks for getting the conversation off to a fantastic start.